Hi folks, you're with Tacitus Today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this radio audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about who is buying the residential homes and residential properties across the Western world today. Is it private home buyers? Is it families? Is it mom and pop? Is it Colombian drug lords? Is it offshore buyers? Is it the big banks? Is it BlackRock? And let's have a look at what's happening, because we're looking at a globalist, a centrally scripted, globalist controlled scenario all across the Western world. Whether it be in purchasing power, because the purchasing power parity in between, say, the United States and Australia or Britain and so on, the purchasing power, the purchasing power of the paycheck is universally similar. Rents are the same. It's as if there's a centrally controlled commissariat that's deciding what we're all going to pay for a pint of milk or a two-bedroom apartment 10 miles from the city centre. It's almost as if it's put in a spreadsheet, or it's formulaic, and it's being applied all across the Western world, because the difference between Britain and Australia and the United States is the difference is actually quite small, to the point where it's obviously not market forces that are driving things. It's obviously controlled. But I just want to have a look at the purchasing of new homes, or homes here, whether they be new or existing. Now, I was looking at some stats from a few videos and a couple of articles online, which were text only. And there's a bit of confusion here. This is in a house buying, a home buying, residential real estate, whether it's all new houses or existing properties or a mix of the two. It was rather vague on this, and I thought it jumped around a bit in these articles, and I suppose they just moved to a different point in order to emphasize whatever they wanted to emphasize here. But let's have a look. So this one thing purports to break down US residential real estate, so home buying over the last, it looks like 3 to 4 years, I'd say, from this. Is it? Now, what they're alleging is pretty scary, but when I first saw it, I thought, oh, wow. And then I thought about it again. Thought, well, this is actually not far away from what I would have roughly concluded, independent of this. So 35% of houses, homes, so residential homes in the US, are being bought by big finance. Now, again, it was vague on, are they existing or new homes? Are they new property development? So let's say it's a new property development, new suburbs being made, and it's got, 100 houses, and they can't sell those houses. They're too expensive, or there aren't the buyers, so they're going to sit there. That the builder might go broke or bankrupt, file for Chapter 11, as they call it in the US, or they can go to like a BlackRock and say, look, you got to help us here. You got to bail us out. Well, we've built these properties. We've put a shitload of money in, so we owe this bank a lot of money. People aren't coming along to buy the homes. We got to sell them at well below the cost of what it cost us to build it even. So we can't let that happen, because that will affect the market for home prices, which will then have a knock-on effect and reduce home prices. So we can't have that. So what we'll do is we'll effectively go to a big cashed-up outfit like BlackRock and say, well, you got to bail us out here. So BlackRock, the tacticians at BlackRock say, well, okay, these guys want to sell the house at, for example, they want to sell these houses at $400,000 to make a buck. But in reality, they can only get $300,000 for these houses. If they are driven by market prices, that is the cash people have in their pocket and the amount of money that people want to spend, then they can only get 300. Now that means that they're going to lose a ton of money. The building company's going to be bailed out anyway, because they're going to have to go bankrupt if they got to sell at that price. So if they have to sell at market prices, not rigged prices, not fixed prices, but market prices, then they're going to go bust. but they built the houses with no regard to market prices. So they're now paying the price or facing the consequences of what in a capitalist system is a rash act, rash move. They've built products that they can't sell and that are way above market, not rigged or fixed price, but again, market price. So they go to the likes of the BlackRock tacticians, look at it and say, well, these guys will go bankrupt if they have to sell at market price. But anyway, we've got so much money tied up in real estate, domestic residential. We don't want the price to drop by 25 or 30%, because then suddenly everyone's going to want to, this will be reported in the media or something. Everyone's going to want to buy their houses more cheaply. So this is going to have a big effect, wider consequences. So we have to artificially pump up and hold up the market here. So we'll buy those houses, and this is in a new development. We'll buy those houses so we can keep them at the artificially, not the market price, but the artificially pumped up, rigged price of 400,000. So it's in the interest as an outfit like BlackRock, which is has got tentacles everywhere you look, that they need to keep the rigged, fixed, pumped up market going. And so they'll do that. Now, the same could be said for existing real estate, where nobody wants, or none of the string pullers, the shot callers, none of them want the real estate price to go down. If it does, like about 1 or 2%, who cares? But they if it dampens down for a year or two and just sort of moves sideways, that's a sort of acceptable. But the price of real estate going down, that drives them into an absolute apoplectic panic. Governments too. So many politicians now depend on real estate for the majority of their income. So the elite class is invested in pumped up, artificially rigged, non-market driven real estate pricing. So I've noticed even this area that I live in, where a whole bunch of houses will come up for sale on the same day, which struck me as rather odd. But interestingly, they'll all sell on the same day. So on the same day, they all sell on the same fucking day. That's bullshit. And a lot of these houses stay vacant for months at a time. There's a house not far from us, quite a nice house, and it was sold getting on for 5 months ago now. And yet it's still empty, still vacant. And you think, well, how's that? That's a house, along with many others, that could be up for rent. So once BlackRock then buys, I'm using BlackRock in generic terms. It may not be BlackRock. It could be State Street. It could be any big financial outfit. Once the big financial outfit buys these houses, they then don't want to put them up for rent, because they look at the rents in the area and say, wow, if we rent those, then we'll have all those places, 50 houses coming on for rent at the same time. That'll drive down the price of rents. We don't want that either. We want to artificially pump up the price of rents, not have them going down. So what we'll do is we'll just leave them empty and vacant. Now, normal people, a normal investor, just a normal person, can't do that. They have to meet the costs of the payments. They need some rent. If they've got an unusually high, very steady, stable income, then they can afford to use some tax offsets there to leave the property empty. There's only a small number of people who've got the income to do that. Certainly, at best 15 or 20% of the income earners in the population could afford to do that, and then not for very long. So, but a big outfit like a BlackRock can write it all off on tax, and instantly they can say, well, these payments. And they can do round robins with other financial institutions. These payments become then a tax loss, which then they write off against other profits. So they can afford to do it, forever if they want to. And this has the effect of artificially, because they're withdrawing properties, if you like, from the rental market, or not putting them on the rental market. And this in turn, taking them off the property for sale market. So they're artificially pumping up rents in this thing. So anyway, 35% of the houses bought and sold are going to big finance. Now, just bear in mind that this is a new phenomenon. It didn't used to exist. The people that were buying houses were homes, residential homes were families, were people, and they were buying it to live in, to raise their families in it, and to give themselves a stake in the future, and a retirement fund. And it was many things, but it was families. And so what they earned, the money they could pay, the houses reflected the purchasing power of the citizens of a nation. They didn't reflect the purchasing power of the big banks or the purchasing power of the money launderers or the offshore drug lords or drug cartels. They reflected the purchasing power of the local people. Now, commercial real estate might have been different. You may have international players going there, and that's fine, but not in the residential real estate. So 35% are now by big finance, which is new. So they're cashed up. They don't care what the fuck they pay because it's all a tax write-off. So if a house is really worth $100, for example, and they pay $150, they don't really care because, again, it's all a tax deduction. But that's not a tax deduction for the family trying to buy the house. That's got to come out from their income, their after-tax income. They don't get any tax write-offs. So that $50, that $50 extra instead of the $100 to go to $150, it's the equivalent of $220 in purchasing power terms difference. So the family is severely and substantially disadvantaged, obviously, by that. So 35% of houses being bought by big finance. 18% are then supposedly bought by offshore investor buyers. Now, this is your drug lords and your cartels, and it's the money launderers. The money launderers are doing this, and so that they didn't exist previously. And this is an era of mass migration, allowing buyers from China and Brahmin buyers from India and places like that come in and buy up swathes of real. Or there's a rich Indonesian family, rich Indonesian corrupt family that has bought up several multi-gazillion dollar houses of prime real estate in an area, and we're talking acreage, swimming pools, tennis courts, the whole thing. And they're doing that. Now, that sort of stuff didn't used to exist. Again, that the homes and the houses were for families and local citizens wanting to buy. So, and again, these money launderers, they don't give a fuck what they pay. They're laundering cash, turning it into clean money. So if they pay 50% more than it's worth, they don't give a shit because they're money laundering. So now with the next category, these to some extent did exist previously, but not to the same extent, is further 15% of properties are being bought up by cashed up migrants. Now, not all the migrants coming are peasants, and a lot of the migrants that come are just nominees for rich offshore interests anyway. So, the illiterate peasant cleaner who buys 3 properties as soon as they arrive in Australia, as soon as they got their residency permit, they'll buy 3 properties in Australia, and they're working 20 hours a week as an illiterate peasant, and they suddenly are able to buy 3 properties. Yeah, sure. They're just nominees for offshore buyers. Again, this isn't something that used to happen. And before you arrived in Australia, you used to have a residency permit. You couldn't just front up and say, refugee. You had to have a residency permit, and without that permit, you couldn't buy anything or become a citizen. So, but these sort of things are handed out very casually and easily these days. So, again, to people who supposedly are meant to speak good English and have qualifications and so on. But so these people now, about 15% of purchasing goes to these cashed up migrants that are really representing. It's the equivalent to the the offshore investor buyers, in my opinion. It's false. Now, this means that 2/3 out of every 3 houses that's sold in Australia and in the United States, in fact, Australia is a bit worse, but every 3 houses that sold, 2 of them are being sold to either big finance or offshore investor interest or drug cartels or whatever for money laundering. Now, that never used to be that way. So let's go back to 1970, where the average house price, and if you compare the average wage, and the average wage and the average house price was, depending on whose numbers you want to look at, it was between 3.5 and 4.2 years of the average wage would buy you the average priced house. Let's just settle on 3.75 just to, or 4. Let's even go 4. 4 years. 4 years wages would buy the average house. Now, the average house, by the way, isn't anything fancy. It's made of what in Australia is called weatherboard. It's 3-bedroom. It's compact. It's got maybe a carport, maybe a garage, but you typically a carport. So it's not it's not a fancy place, and you've got mum, dad, and 2.5 children. So the two youngest would share a bedroom. The eldest would have a bedroom. So we're not talking something big or fancy by any stretch. The car would be very basic and wouldn't even have a radio back then. And because if you had a radio, you had to get an upmarket. You had to move up the food chain, if you will, on the model of car. So I mean, you'd have a driving holiday, vacation once a year, and so on. So that would be, and that all came from the average wage, for Christ's sakes. And really, the average wage, the difference between the average wage and the minimum wage really wasn't that much. Anyone who had a full-time job was, close to the average wage, or was the average wage, which means you could afford all those things on the average wage. Now let's look at the average house price today, and the amount, and it's gone from 4 years to take you to own it to 18 years. So that just gives you an idea. It takes 18 years of pay as against 4 years of pay back at the time. So now 18 years of pay is the average. Even if you've got two incomes, it's still 9 years to buy, again, assuming average income. It would take you 9. This is a theoretical thing, by the way, because the 9 years is the gross income, and from your income has to come taxes and medical care costs and superannuation, social security, retirement costs. So there's a difference in the amount of money that the government takes. So the reality is that in cash terms, it would take you 6 years to buy your house in 1970. This is from your average income, whereas today it would take about 40 years to do it. So that again illustrates the difference in the cost of acquiring a house, and that even accounts for the low interest rates that we have been the case. Even today, the interest rates are still low in historical terms, even though they've gone up a bit in the last year or so. So when we look at that, we can see the incredible difference in the architecture and the landscape of home purchasing, but it's applied all over the Western world, and so there's no question. It's like World Economic Forum: you'll own nothing and be happy. It's being forced on us without our consent, without our knowledge, without our agreement. It's being forced on us, and it primarily involves a wealth transfer. Because if your purchasing power is high, you accumulate wealth. If your purchasing power is low, which it is currently and has been for a while, then wealth is transferring elsewhere, because the goods and services you acquire are now more expensive, which means the profits from that purchasing are going somewhere else. They're going in the pocket of the citizenry. They're going in the pockets of the offshore money launderers, or the big banks, or the elites, or the people that have sufficient capital mass to move it around. If you had enough money 20 years ago to engage in, say, substantial real estate investment and purchasing, you could do very well today. I know people who've done that. I know people who've retired in great comfort, because 25 years ago they got an inheritance, and they decided to go out and buy real estate everywhere. Well, they actually didn't decide. I'm thinking of a woman now, or two people actually, they're financially illiterate in the extreme, but they can barely add up one and one. They're so financially illiterate, and so they go to they get an inheritance, not a huge one, but inheritance, and so they go to a financial advisor and go, oh, what do we do with this money? Oh, I don't know. And the financial advisor is some financial advisor in the fucking bush who equally doesn't know. The financial advisor says, buy property. Without any sort of understanding, but it turns out that the property investment was probably the golden upon golden investment that you could make, and so these people would buy 5 or 6 properties, and for $100,000 a piece, and these properties are all worth $2 million a piece. So they've done very nicely, thank you, and created, manufactured nothing. They're idiots. They're moronic in every sense, but they got this inheritance. They put their money in real estate, and they're now retired and living in considerable comfort, based on that sort of wild, blindfolded shot in the dark. But nonetheless, coming back to the dream, the American dream, Australian dream, British dream, Canadian dream, whatever, is that the home buyer now has huge competition to buy what once was just a home buyers purchasing a marketplace. It's now a marketplace for, well, it's not even a fucking marketplace. It's now a clearinghouse for international finance, and people who are not restricted by the incomes they have. They've got access to money laundering, tax offsets, international tax offsets, all sorts of scams and schemes that the buyer doesn't have. So the buyer gets crowded out. Now, I've been to housing auctions and I've watched it happen. And as I've mentioned a number of times before, I speak good enough Chinese Mandarin to be able to listen to the buying agents that are buying stuff. And you look at a house that's up for sale for example, $100, and it gets to as soon as it hits the anticipated reserve price, all the local buyers, all the families, all the people on their 9-to-5 jobs, they've just dropped out. They're knocked out straight away. And it's now only a game for offshore investors. So you get the Brahmin Indian investor competing with the Mandarin Chinese investor, which sometimes there you can get just two Chinese guys, or 3 Chinese guys, and they're the only ones left, all competing against each other. And they'll pay 50, 60, 70% above the asking price. They don't care what the fuck they pay. They really don't care. And of course, this means they're not buyers for domestic properties or somewhere to live or a house. They're not buyers. They're money laundering investor buyers. And what they pay is irrelevant. And of course, this is what the local Australian families or Western or American or whatever families and income earners are competing with. So it's a completely different landscape. Now, what's interesting here is this is known about. I've been aware, perhaps not in such specific percentage detail, but I've been aware of this for years, decades. I've been aware of it, and yet no government, no Western government, has lifted a finger to stop it or limit it or restrict it. Which just goes to show how much this international real estate pricing and even rental pricing is a scam. Now, just when you withdraw this many properties from the real market and leave as many of them properties empty as or people are paying way over the card for these properties, then you've got the likes of the big finance not only wanting to artificially rig and pump up the house prices, which they do. They also want to rig and artificially pump up the rental prices. And the way to do that is to leave mass properties vacant, and to encourage people through tax to say go Airbnb and things like that. So this limits the amount of property on the market for rental artificially. It's not market driven, artificially to do, which then of course artificially pumps up the rental prices. Similarly, even if you do get a private investor, the mom and pop who decide to buy a second house because they want to it's an investment for their kids or something like that. And there's a bit of that around, but even then they have to be on higher incomes, and this is not for people on average incomes, far from it. So they might buy, but they're paying well over the card, and they're not in an advantageous position in terms of tax write-offs and this sort of stuff. So they have to demand a higher rent. So you can get a property that was purchased years ago for $50,000, and when they were renting the property out, they were renting it for $250 a week, for example. So the best they could get, the highest amount they could get for the rent wasn't what was driving their decision. So that they would rent it for $250 a week. But then they sell that property, and the property that sold for $50,000 years ago now sells for $1 million. So the new buyers need to now have $800 a week for the rent, to help them cover the cost of the repayments they have to make, because they paid so much for the overpriced property. So this in turn has a knock-on effect, which is substantial again, which no government's attempting to sort out. Now, if it was real market prices, real market forces that were driving things, we would see a completely different real estate landscape. But we need to understand it's not market forces that are driving this. It's rigged market conditions that are being set up to transfer wealth away from the Western middle class. You've been with Tassels today, your Pushback channel, and thank you for listening.